Hi, my name's Frances and I'm the Development Officer at Interfaith Scotland. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to our Facebook Live event, The Climate Crisis Beyond Nations. This event today is part of our Beyond series, which looks at the climate crisis from many different angles. We've been hosting this series throughout 2021 in the build-up to the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow. Each month we've focused on a different theme, such as beyond politics, religion, science, economy, borders, and beyond COP26. The purpose of calling a series the Beyond series is to demonstrate that the climate crisis is beyond anything that humanity has ever faced. This Facebook Live is being broadcast during Scottish Interfaith Week, which is taking place from the 31st of October to the 7th of November. We're about halfway through the week now, and we'd love for you to continue to join us both in person and online. And do check out our Scottish Interfaith Week website for more details. This year, we put Scottish Interfaith Week as the same week as the first week of COP, and the theme we chose was Together for Our Planet. I can attest that COP is very much taking place down the road. I've heard a lot of helicopters going overhead. I've even gone out to see if I can see any famous dignitaries and heads of state going down Argyle Street. But of course, our theme today is Beyond Nations, recognising our common humanity and the importance of working together as this one united humanity for the well-being of the planet. Now, today we have three distinguished speakers with us: Professor Joe Goldblatt, Reverend Bonnie Evans-Hill, and Maja Groff. Each speaker will share their thoughts with us for 10 minutes, and then there'll be time for a Q&A afterwards. Some questions have already been sent to us, but if you'd like to ask a question, do put it into the chat on your Facebook Live if you're watching on Facebook Live, and we'll pick the question up and ask it to our distinguished speakers. So, as I've mentioned, our speakers will be sharing their thoughts on the theme Beyond Nations from their own unique perspectives. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker. Maja Groff is an international lawyer based in The Hague and is a convener of the Climate Governance Commission, which seeks to propose high-impact global governance innovations adequate to meet the climate challenge. She has assisted with the development and servicing of multilateral treaties for more than a decade, and also works at various international criminal tribunals, teaching at the Hague Academy of International Law, and is currently a visiting professor scholar at Leiden University in the Faculty of Governance and Global Affairs. Maja has drafted a wide range of international legal policy documents and published academically on private and public international law, human rights, and global governance. She holds degrees from McGill, Civil Law and Common Law, Oxford and Harvard Universities, and is an attorney admitted to practice in the state of New York. She served on the international law and UN committees of the New York City Bar Associations, the advisory boards of B Corp Europe and EBBF, organizations devoted to ethical business, and is a now partner. She's also co-winner of the 2018 New Shape Prize for Global Governance Innovation and is co-author of the 2020 book, Global Governance and the Emergence of Global Institutions for the 21st Century. And Maja is zooming in today from the COP. We've had a few technical issues with sound, but we're hoping that we'll all be able to hear clearly, and looking forward to hearing from you, Maja.
Yes, thank you so much, Frances, and all. And please do tell me if the sound is not working on your side, and I can sub off. I'm in the blue zone at the COP negotiations and could only join from here, so my apologies for that. But thank you so much for that kind introduction, and also organizing this wonderful panel on this Beyond series. And Beyond Nations is so critical for how we think about this climate challenge, this unprecedented climate emergency. And I'll talk a little bit today about the work that we've been doing on the Climate Governance Commission and our recent interim report, which I'll put in the chat so people can access that and have a look if they're interested. And also I'll put in the chat, just for everybody's information, a link to our book, the Cambridge University Press book that is open access. It's free for all to download, about the next step in what we propose as a comprehensive new global governance system to protect humanity from the variety of existential risks that we are facing. So I'll put that also in the link in the chat, and it's free access. So yes, so the Climate Governance Commission, we have this new report, Governing Our Climate Future, Our Shared Future. And fundamental to this global governance perspective, we have now treaty-based institutions at the international level, the UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement, which are amazing achievements of humanity across borders. But from the Climate Governance Commission perspective, we need to support and supplement what the UNFCCC is doing, what the Paris Agreement is trying to achieve to ensure that we meet its targets and cover all the variety of issues that really we have to tackle to handle emergency together. And this involves a new way of thinking, a type of radical collaboration among peoples beyond the nation state, a new way of thinking about our international common humanity, a new way of thinking about what kind of radical collaboration amongst all the peoples of the world is possible. So first, a few framing thoughts about where we are in terms of the climate challenge. Why is the climate emergency an issue that will have to generate this thinking beyond the nation state? Is our dominant way of thinking and governing ourselves at the international level to really kind of innovate beyond our 19th century Westphalian conceptions of the nation state. So currently, under the UNFCCC framework, the approximately 200 countries, 191 countries who have ratified the Paris Agreement, they're obliged to submit nationally determined contributions. So still the climate action implementation of the agreement is on the shoulder of the nation states. But based on this decentralized sort of approach, to date, there are only about 9% emission cuts by the end of 2030, according to the latest national targets, compared to the 45% reduction in emissions that we need to stay on track with, what we hope will be a safe climate temperature rise of 1.5 degrees. So currently, according to these national plans, we're on track collectively in the world to a warming path to a catastrophic 2.7 degrees Celsius. And scientists have, of course, warned that any global temperature increase above 1.5 degrees Celsius, we will face really very serious risks, cascading tipping points among the various systems, biophysical systems that regulate the global climate. So we have also this very, very narrow window for action. We have to really start steeply cutting emissions now and this decade to have emissions by 2030. So this is a shared global challenge, and our governance approaches still today are really based on the nation state. And the nation state has, of course, been useful as a governance layer, administrative layer. I think no one working in global governance thinks there should be a dissolution of the nation state. National autonomy is vitally important. But because we have these shared planetary problems, climate change, biodiversity loss being prime among them, that we're talking about today, we have to think in new ways beyond the nation state, both in terms of our identity, our shared humanity, so that we can address the vulnerability of the most at-risk populations around the world, for example, in small island developing states who might lose their whole national territory. So we can have the empathy, the compassion across the world to address the effects of climate change in a just and humane way, but also, again, so that we can start to think in this new way of radical international collaboration on principles of justice, fairness, but also innovation, progress, forward motion, that we really work together to tackle the climate challenge. And so just in my last few minutes, I'll just talk about few of the suggestions that we make in this Climate Governance Commission report about how can we start thinking in a new, innovative way that's just not just nationally centered, but taking the whole common good into account, and then strengthening our collective shared mechanisms for managing the global climate. So firstly, we have a variety of proposals that work within the existing international architecture. For example, one great proposal is Global Green Hydrogen Alliance, which is proposed by one of our Indian experts based in New Delhi, and who says, you know, a lot of countries have green hydrogen energy projects. This is a new fuel source that could have cascading systemic effects on our energy mix to help us really meet our targets, but it's fragmented. It's very focused into developed countries. There should be a collaboration across countries at the international level. There should be a new platform to share knowledge, technology, to accelerate the development of this technology worldwide for the benefit of all. Another proposal is for a global climate policy clearinghouse. Most countries now are working at the national level to reinvent the wheel on their climate policies, for example, types of carbon taxation or reducing fossil fuel subsidies, other different vital basic policies to really sharply reduce emissions. So there should be an international policy clearinghouse where countries can work together, can share information, can learn from each other, so that we can, again, accelerate the policies we need to implement our shared international goals. Then lastly, we have some longer term proposals for the international community. Really, given the gravity of the climate crisis, of catastrophic biodiversity loss that scientists are also warning us about, we have a proposal, for example, from several wonderful academics and practitioners on a global environment agency, which environmental specialists have been proposing for years, but countries have been too narrow about wanting to safeguard their national sovereignty. But it's quite, it's sort of like a way to basically self-inflicting harm if you cling to this too narrow conception of national sovereignty, rather than empowering, you know, a well thought through international institution that could really help support, coordinate, orchestrate our global efforts in an accelerated and meaningful way to protect the whole human species, to protect our planet. We also have a proposal for an international court for the environment. We even talk about, as we do in our book, the need to update the UN Charter, which has not been updated for 75 years, even though this was to be revisited within 10 years, to really make sure our key governance institutions at the international level are fit for purpose to deal with these global ecological challenges and other existential risks that humanity is facing. Very much look forward to discussion.
Thank you very much indeed, Maja. It's been very inspiring and interesting to hear about the different practical solutions that could be potentially implemented globally. I think that's a very important point about moving beyond that narrow sovereignty that, you know, people could be threatened with doing things on a global scale, but how important it is to have that as you say, radical international collaboration. So thank you so much for speaking with us, and we look forward to speaking to you again in the Q&A later on. So now I'm delighted to welcome Professor Joe Goldblatt. Professor Goldblatt is chair of the Edinburgh Interfaith Association and Emeritus Professor of Planned Events at Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh, Scotland. He is also the author, co-author, and editor of 40 books in the field of events management, one of which has been reprinted over 35 years, entitled Special Events, the Art and Science of Celebration. So over to you, Joe. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Frances, and thank you very much, Maja, for that inspiring first presentation. When I think about our topic title today, Climate Crisis Beyond Nations, I'm reminded, although I'm a member of the Jewish faith, of the words from the New Testament. In Matthew 25:35, the prophet wrote, "I was a stranger and you welcomed me, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in." So today, as we celebrate this week, Scottish Interfaith Week, I think it's important to remember that some of the constructs of sovereignty and traditional boundaries are in fact in the 21st century, when we are experiencing the world's greatest crisis, a climate crisis, are in fact artificial. You see, my life began as an expatriate in Scotland some 15 years ago. And one of the first experiences I enjoyed was a walk in our bucolic, beautiful Scottish borders. My friend Richard, who was a town planner, led us across what I believed was a private property area. And when I asked, "Are we free to walk here?" he answered, "In Scotland, we have the right to roam. This land belongs to all of us." Now, whilst the Land Reform Act of 2003 does contain certain exemptions, it is markedly different from our brothers and sisters in England, where right to roam is only reserved for open access of public land. And then there are many other biblical references in addition to Matthew about nation state building and the environment, ranging from Genesis, and even in Leviticus it is written, "The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine, and you are strangers and sojourners with me. And in all the country you possess, you shall allow a redemption of the land," which is the creation of the idea of sabbatical every 7 years. And also in Leviticus it is written, "Love thy neighbor as thyself." Once again, showing that boundaries, some sovereignties, are artificial. I'm reminded also of that classic story that happened during the recent Trump administration in the United States, when Mike Pence, who was the vice president, was giving a speech about racism, and he was asked about racist activity in the United States, and he said, "There is no such thing as racist activity. Racism has never happened here." And as he began to go on and on with these false statements, a fly landed on his head and wouldn't move. Well, one of the viewers watching that debacle was Abraham Zendi, who's professor at American University and who wrote the best-selling book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And when Abraham Zendi was asked about Vice President Pence's statement denying racism in America, he answered, "If you won't let my people go, I'm going to cause flies to come as a sign of what's wrong. But I won't let the flies be on the people, but the fly will be a symbol that you're just wrong. You're lying. So as is quoted in Exodus, let my people go." Well, this is an opportunity, as Maja has already mentioned, for cultivating new global values beyond COP26. This is an opportunity to cultivate greater compassion throughout the world. This is an opportunity where we celebrate today Scottish Interfaith Week to celebrate the contributions of the Scottish Enlightenment, the concept of creating a better life for all citizens, as our brothers and sisters did back in the 18th century, and to, in fact, through reflection, through reimagining, to, as Scots have always done, to reinvent the world as a better place for all of us to live. I believe there are three challenges for transitioning from protectionist states to states that embrace globalization in the 21st century. And these three challenges, in my mind, are economic, cultural, and technological. In terms of economic, we need to move from ardent capitalism to a social capital system that allows us to share the greatest wealth with those who have the least. The second challenge is our cultural reality. As we see over 1 million refugees in Lebanon, desperate for a new life, Syrian refugees, we know that there will be many more millions behind them, just as the Afghan refugees have now started to come to Scotland. And I must say, with the wonderful support of Interfaith Scotland, the Edinburgh Interfaith Association, Interfaith Glasgow, and others, they have been warmly welcomed as brothers and sisters in our country, our shared country. So these cultural nuances and changes are going to be significantly important as well as we embrace the other among us. And third, and finally, the technological changes. We need to embrace a world where it is not a matter of either or, technology or face-to-face, but rather the word that is most operative is and, that we are creating a hybrid world using technology perhaps to reduce green travel, but also to allow us to travel all over the world through technology beyond nations without creating a negative impact on the environment. In summary, I believe that one of the great thinkers of the Scottish Enlightenment really understood this concept of beyond nations better than even we three panelists today. For Robert Burns wrote the famous poem, "A man's a man for all that." And of course, it could have been in the 21st century, "A man's a man and a woman for all that." But he closes his poem by simply saying, "We are brothers, and I would add sisters for all that." People of faith and no faith must now work together as one future nation, one that is without boundaries. It is the new nation of humankind. And as long as the sound of our heart beats remain boundless, we may also work together to build a more sustainable world. Another great thinker was Chief Seattle, who was the famous Native American environmental activist in the 19th century. And he wrote that when it is all finished, we must take nothing from the earth but our memories and leave nothing behind but our footprints. Finally, I began by quoting Matthew, and I'll conclude by quoting Isaiah. In the passage in the Old Testament, Isaiah commands us, "For you shall go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall break forth into singing, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands." Well, I suggest that we must commit today, both individually and collectively, to going out in joy so that our current generation may break forth in singing, and future generations will clap their hands as they grow from strength to strength because of our commitment to build a new world without artificial borders and whose boundlessness may create greater compassion, kindness, and yes, Francis, Maja, Bonnie, love for all humankind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe, for your powerful talk there and all those wonderful biblical references and imagery. I particularly was struck what you were saying about being sojourners of the land. And I remember reading about within the Hebrew scriptures about the land having a sabbatical as well as humans having a day of rest. And these are all things that have been so important over history, and so much has been forgotten, but going back to those original times and all the instructions and advice are very useful. It's also very struck about what you're saying about cultivating new global values. And of course, we've seen already the technical changes happening through online meetings, and let's hope that in the future these things will also help contribute towards reducing the carbon emissions. So I won't talk for too much further because we have another speaker coming up, and we have Bonnie Evans-Hill, Reverend Bonnie Evans-Hill, and she is a priest in the Scottish Episcopal Church. She's considerable experience in interreligious dialogue, working with organisations such as the EU Commission on Foreign Affairs and Security, the World Council of Churches, Churches Together in Britain and Ireland, the Anglican Communion, and the Anglican Mission Organisation USPG, which stands for United Society for Partners in the Gospel. Bonnie is convener of the SEC Interfaith Relations Committee. She's been involved in contributing to the UN Office for the Prevention of Genocide's global plan of action for religious leaders and actors to prevent incitement to violence. That is quite a long title. Alongside several other publications, Bonnie is co-author of the book Engaging Islam from a Christian Perspective, published by Peter Lang. So over to you, Bonnie, and delighted to have you with us this afternoon.
Thank you so much. Yeah, these titles, I don't know what it is, why they have to be so long. Anyway, it's a real privilege and an honor to be here, especially among this august panel. As I start, I have one picture that I'd like to share, and when I'm done with the picture, I'll let you know. But if it's possible to bring that picture up, that would be wonderful. There we go. Thank you. This is Mer de Glace, and it's just one of the glaciers in the European Alps. And of course, the Alps is a mountain range which crosses those invisible borders that we impose upon our landscapes. The glacier is reached by a railway built in the Victorian era. It comes just a little bit higher than that platform, which you can see in the picture. When it was built, it finished at the top of a huge field of ice, working its way slowly down a deep valley. So the ice would have covered that platform when it was built. The melt-off from the glacier fed into the meadows throughout the Alps, providing fodder for cattle. But from around the year 2000, the glacier started melting fast. And now the railway ends at the top of an empty valley. This whole valley that you can see before you was full of ice until the year 2000. And it's empty because the soil, the sides of the valley, are too unstable to enable plants and trees to grow. So what was a valley full of ice is now a desert, which a trickle of melt-off manages to make its way through. Nothing grows. At the top of the valley, standing up there, around every 5 minutes, you can hear a loud crack, followed by huge boulders and clumps of soil breaking away from the sides of the valley. You get a sense that the valley is screaming. So if we can pull away from that, thank you. So a few days after my visit to this mountain valley, I was taken on a tour of the industrial docks at Dunkirk. It's a place that isn't open to the public, And huge cranes controlled by one person sitting in a box somewhere remove the cargo from ships big enough to hold a city. Hills of coal, other materials line the docks, and these will be used to make steel or to fire oil refineries, the end product of which also lies in massive piles, plastic pellets. I was told that Dunkirk has one of the worst air qualities in Europe, and not a place you would want to bring up children. We went to the Dockers Cafe for lunch, and the men came in covered in black dust, obviously breathing it in as they work. It's a grim job, and these industries are much of the reason glaciers miles away are dying, and the plant and animal life they used to sustain are in drought. Can you imagine? The Alps are having a drought. Well, 40 years ago, I'm giving away my age here, I lived in a country that had just had a revolution, and I was working for an English language newspaper. It was a time when there was such hope to build a better nation. I did a piece of considerable research into environmental issues, particularly from a theological perspective. And our supervisor had attended an international conference on sustainable development with UNESCO and handed me their latest information, outlining various forms of alternative energy which were already being developed in the way of wind and wave power, solar energy, and the different technologies that would sustain these. This is 40 years ago. The point was made that we had the know-how. What was needed was investment, and for governments and industry to invest in them. But it was also acknowledged that there was much less profit in it for them, and that the investment would have to be considerable to begin with, even though it would pay for itself in the long run. And that was the problem: too little profit. I wrote a series of 3 feature articles for the paper, but these were turned down and never published. Why? Because the government at the time believed the environmental movement was part of a plot to prevent the third world countries from developing. This accusation has been repeated many times over since, and hard questions need to be asked of ourselves. If Europe and the US really want poorer nations to follow environmental standards, then they must share technology. We've heard this repeated again at COP26. We now know that nature does not function in competition. We've misunderstood the terminology of survival of the fittest. It's not about what plant or animal is stronger than others and overpowers them. It's rather about how well each is able to adapt to their environment, living alongside other life forms and attuning themselves to their surroundings. The healthiest habitats are those with higher levels of diversity, where the variety of plants and animals are able to live in balance. Where there's a deficit in one, that is made up by others. Trees collaborate through minute root and fungi systems, sharing nutrients with one another, dependent upon the seasons. The stronger sharing with the weaker, because with a change in season, what was once weak becomes strong, and vice versa. The command to love one another, to feed the hungry, house the homeless, clothe the naked, honor the older generation, and protect the vulnerable is part of religious teachings and found throughout the Bible. The best among us is the servant of all. Is this not also the secret to our thriving, both as human beings alongside one another, but also with the environment in which we live? What we've considered to be religious instruction is also about our very survival, and not just us, but the whole of life around us. The area where I now live has for several centuries been what I would call the engine room of Britain. Coal mining provided the fuel for industry. As mining died out, oil platforms were set out in the Firth of Forth. Those are now defunct, and the area has become a place where other platforms get towed in order to be taken apart. Wind turbines were being built until Brexit meant contracts were lost, and now even that has been shut down. It was an area where flax was grown and woven into sails for the ships which took a colonial power abroad where even more resources were exploited. And yet this area where I live is an area of deprivation, never really benefiting from the resources that it provided to the powerful. But it's also an area where fishing has taken place for centuries. Old fishing songs tell of the ways of the wind and the tide, when to go out to sea and when to stay home, when to allow the fish to breed and when to go out for that one big catch. Numerous indigenous cultures have lived close to the land, in tune with the earth and the sea around them, knowing when to harvest and when to leave fallow for rest. There's a Native American story I was told years ago. A young man sought out the old shaman, hoping to learn to become a shaman himself. And the shaman told him that there was a mother deer who leaves her fawn in the trees next to a meadow when she goes out foraging. The young man was told to search out the fawn and to kill it. So he went in search of the fawn, waiting early in the morning and watching as the mother deer left her fawn in the trust of the forest. The young man watched the care with which she said goodbye to her child and left. And he watched the young deer as it lay there in innocence, and then went back to the shaman to confess he didn't have the heart to kill the fawn. Well, the shaman then told him that now he was ready, as long as he approached every plant he harvested for medicine with the same attitude of awe and sacredness as he had viewed the fawn. He would be taking a life. 40 years, and really for much longer, we've had the knowledge about how to live more sustainably, and yet we've still not learned how to share, how to care, how to be kind with one another and with our world. I'd like to share the words of one of my favorite authors, John O'Donoghue, who writes in his book, Benedictus. There is a kindness that dwells deep down in things. It presides everywhere, often in the places we least expect. The world can be harsh and negative, but if we remain generous and patient, kindness inevitably reveals itself. Something deep in the human soul seems to depend on the presence of kindness. Something instinctive in us expects it. And once we sense it, we're able to trust and open ourselves. While much of the solutions to our resource needs, particularly in the way of power, will to a certain extent continue to necessitate heavy industry as we endeavor to search out more sustainable alternatives. But there is much, so much more that each of us can do in our daily lives in the way of mindset, of stopping consumption when we have enough, when we have what we need, of not being distracted by shinier cars or furniture or houses or bicycles or shoes or coffee pots, and of learning to share our resources, feeding those who are hungry, providing homes to those who are without, or who are running away from violent conflict or environmental disaster. Each and every one of us needs to learn to go slower, thinking carefully before action or speech. Is what I'm about to do kind? How will it affect others? It's just not how we're used to behaving, even within our religious or belief systems, even those at times function in competition rather than cooperation. The challenge for this COP26 is not just for political leaders or big business, it's for each and every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, for a very beautiful and touching talk there. And as the other speakers have spoken about the importance of love and kindness to all life, I was particularly struck the example that you gave of trees and other plants sharing nutrients, supporting one another, that the greater diversity that you have in nature shows the health of the forest. So it's not in competition, but it's that symbiosis between the ecosystems. So I kind of feel if nature can do it, why can't we, you know, as we say, go beyond nations and care for one another and support each other as well. So thank you very much, all three speakers. We now have an opportunity to have a Q&A. So we're going to bring all of you onto the screen now. And we have some questions that were given to us in advance. And if by any chance there are some questions for people watching just now on the Facebook Live, do put those into the chat function of the Facebook too, and we will be able to answer those as well. So we're going to start now with the first question that was sent to us earlier. And the question is, how can nations working together be beneficial towards combating climate change? Now, I think everyone has said a bit about this already, but if there's anything else that you might want to add about nations working together that would be beneficial, this is your chance to share a bit more just now. Now, I actually can't see everybody on my screen, and I think that was Joe trying to speak there. You're all on mute as well. So if you want to unmute yourself.
And there you go. I think one parallel we could draw is with the great anthropologist, Dr. Margaret Mead, who once wrote, "Never underestimate the power of a small group of people to change the world. It's the only thing that ever has." And in fact, as we are all travelers on spaceship Earth, the climate crisis is absolutely not a job for individual nations. It's a job for the family of man and women to come together. And while I applaud the efforts of COP26, I believe that's just one lever. There are many other levers, such as the new framework suggested by Maja and others, that need to be deployed and continuously deployed and reinvented to solve this crisis.
Thank you, Joe. Absolutely agree with that. Maja.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the positive that we can share about what's already happening beyond nation states is the incredible international agreements and norms, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UN Charter, and then all the subsequent international human rights treaties, the Framework Convention for Climate Governance and the Paris Agreement, which must progress further. All this work must go further and intensify, but we already have quite incredible foundations for further international cooperation of nations, beyond nations. And UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, it's basically every country in the world that is part. This is incredible. This is unprecedented. So we also have to look at the positive. But one important dimension, I think, is also like our background sort of culture of geopolitics in the world. And this is where those religious values come in, should come in so powerfully among other places. But certainly, why can't we now, as an international community, transcend this culture of competition? And in particular, military competition with the buildup of arms. We have crucial problems to solve. So it would be nice if everybody called for, especially large states, but every state in the world, to transcend this culture of geopolitical contest for power and for dominance, which is obsolete. If it ever made sense, it definitely does not make sense today. And just one last thing about how nations can cooperate much further. Yeah, I mentioned, a whole range of ways, and like building substantial new institutions that will really truly protect the planetary environment. But Bonnie was mentioning, the technology transfer that needs to happen, which is like we saw with the COVID vaccine, the scientific vaccines collaboration that was happening all across the world in an unprecedented way. We need that kind of technological development sharing for climate, also for funding, finance. We're the wealthiest, set of humans on planetary history, yet we're still not meeting the global climate finance goals. So there's so many ways. If we just apply, as Bonnie was saying, these core religious values, as Joe was saying, love, compassion, thinking of others, we could really make transformative changes towards climate action.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too. I mean, I think with some of the very limited work that I've done with the UN Office for Genocide Prevention, you do hear of the criticism, heavy criticism against the UN and other things like, COP26 that's happening now. And yes, I do think that constructive criticism is something that's essential. Essential to the health of these kind of talks. And I've heard it said, if we didn't have the UN or if we didn't have these kind of talks happening, we would need them anyway. That's not to say that it's going to solve all of the problems, and that I think it's very easy as people who are not really part of the talks to sit back and maybe be a bit complacent and complain, they're not doing this, they're not doing that, but actually what are we doing too? So it's one of those things where we need these global forums in order to work out, thrash out the difficulties together. But it's also something each and every one of us, whether we're sitting, I'm on the coast of Fife or you're in Hyderabad or you're in Colorado where I grew up, everybody, all of us need to be somehow working together too, individually and collectively.
Great. Thank you very much, Bonnie. And as it just struck as what you said at the end there about being, coming in from all different places, and the power of that technology to be able to work together. We really don't have any excuse to be able to go beyond those barriers. And as you say, that it's the geopolitical desire for power, and as you say, it's beyond that now. It has to be beyond that for the sake of the planet and everything within that, whether it's the plants, the animals, the humans, everything is so interrelated to each other. So our second question is slightly similar to what we've been talking about. So it says, nations from around the world are coming together to find a solution to the issues of the climate crisis. What are some of the potential barriers that they will have to cross when they come together?
Well, as the minority on the panel today, and being surrounded by three distinguished women, I must say one of the barriers will be diversity in leadership. I am very disappointed when I look at these panels that are predominantly all male, and the leaders, which are predominantly all male. I do not believe that you can have balanced decision-making. And of course, some of the things that Maja kindly reminded us that I mentioned earlier, compassion, love, unless you have a conversation that is robust to both men, women, LGBTQI, and others. So I hope that inclusion, equality, will lead us to greater decision-making.
Thank you, Joe.
I'd like to echo that. We know that, when it comes to development work or peacekeeping or reconciliation, any way that we want to move forward as humanity, that if you include, women as well as men, if you have a greater diverse, just like, I spoke about earlier, the more diverse an environment is, the healthier it is. If you have more diverse people participating at all levels of negotiation, then the health and well-being of all improves. If you just have one particular small group, even that small group doesn't necessarily improve either. But if it's more diverse, then the health and well-being, the financial well-being, everything improves for everybody. So we need that diversity in order to take those steps forward.
Thank you. I've had a question in the chat here, in Facebook chat from Chris Dumont, who's saying that the culture of competition spoken of by Maja is built into capitalism and with nations in financial competition with each other. So how do we actually get past that? It's a big question. I'm going to go to Maja for that one first of all.
Yeah, that's an extremely important point. That is not just the military competition, which still is unfortunately a very live issue, and it's very sad because we should be beyond this sort of military or geopolitical kind of contest culture, which, I mean, we've had 75 years since UN Charter was adopted to sort of get over it and work it out, and have a international rule-based system. But this point about then economic competition is also very important between nations. But of course, nations also often support their national corporations. There's a symbiosis, and it's indeed some individual corporations have a larger economic footprint than individual countries. We have many huge multinationals which are so much more wealthy than, you know, the vast majority of countries of the world. So we have a very problematic economic landscape that indeed is still this dominant paradigm of extractive economics, and also, you know, types of predatory capitalism, be it of human labor, truly of the international environment. So and there have been efforts to try to reach into the multinational space to have, you know, through UN processes, to have guidelines for multinational across the sort of ethical and rule-based area. So there are efforts, but and increasingly, one very, very promising thing is I think there are more and more corporate leaders in very, very big corporations like Paul Pullman at Unilever and Benioff at Salesforce, who are very vocally saying, you know, things have to change. The previous CEO of Danone. So there are clear and very central leadership voices now in the corporate sphere that want a holistic shift across our whole economic systems, and there are many people now working on that. So I do agree as part of the geopolitical shift, but also it's within the corporate sectors themselves, and there are a lot of people who are really working as hard as they can to accelerate these shifts, like the B Corp movement, the B corporations, benefit corporations, and a whole host of other initiatives that we have to also support, and hopefully that will also accelerate to solve these problems.
Thank you very much, Moya. But Bonnie, you had something to add?
Yeah, just as you were speaking, I was reminded of an example from when Britain outlawed slavery, outlawed the slave trade, and part of that came about because there was an attempt to boycott sugar. And there was a fear that if Britain was no longer engaged in the trade of sugar, that somehow the economy would collapse. Well, actually, what happened is that the economy didn't collapse. You know, people still need food, they need shelter, they need clothing. You know, the everyday economy of the ordinary person, that continued. The economy didn't collapse. What did collapse was the sugar trade. So, you know, yeah, you know, social justice has its place. Yeah.
As I said earlier, Francis, it also is not a matter, again, of either or, it's and. And so one example of this is in the 20th century, businesses moved from strict competition or cooperation to a new universe called coopetition. And in coopetition, some businesses work together for a common purpose. It might mean with suppliers, it might mean with the chain system that provides them with the ability to bring their products to market. But coopetition is absolutely a way forward for capitalism to be able to save the planet together.
Thank you. I've not heard of that phrase before. Sounds interesting. We've just got 5 minutes to go, and I've got another question which I think is quite an important one, because it's actually been asked in advance and also in the chat as well. And that's relating to the exclusion of Indigenous communities to COP, particularly through travel and vaccination and being unable to make it. And it has been said that this is one of the most unequal COPs because of that. And so how can we handle this issue and support the Indigenous communities? And there's also a side question here also about land reform and rewilding for our agriculture and food systems. So that's actually a lot to cover in a few minutes. But if there's anything from that you're inspired to respond to, that would be great in our last few minutes.
I think it's essential that we listen to the Indigenous communities, the people who have been living close to the land for centuries, and there's something in those cultures that we can learn something from. It's essential that they're involved. We need them desperately.
And as Professor Ibrahim Zindi said in his rebuke of Vice President Pence claiming that he was not a racist, it's not enough to deny racism. We must work every day of our lives to become anti-racist, anti-haters. And to do that, we have to demonstrate it with real action on the ground. And I hope that in future COP conferences and all conferences, there will be greater opportunities for inclusion, for equality in terms of not only the attendance, but also the design of the conference from the very beginning.
And can I just say on this, the question of inclusion of Indigenous peoples and groups, I mean, this issue shows, this reality shows the limitations of the nation state model and ways we must go beyond. And we know at other UN forums and indeed at the national level that Indigenous peoples must be listened to and integrated and empowered, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this, again, is like, it's perfect for this panel because it's about how we reconnect with each other in our diversity and really look beyond this rigid conception of the nation state, but draw from all of the diversity of humanity. So Indigenous peoples is one, I mean, we're in a global health pandemic still. And so this COP is highlighting the global inequalities of various types, of course, that we have to keep working on and keep this unity of humanity that Joe talked about, the religious vision we need of loving each other, taking care of each other, and being a united humanity, truly consulting and listening to each other in all of our diversity.
Thank you, Maja. I think that's so important, and you summed it up beautifully. We have a couple of minutes left, and we have one last, I think, quite important question here from Jeremy Fox, who asks, particularly for Maja, sorry, back to you again, can we envisage the UN being granted the authority to impose rules on big international companies? Big question.
Well, of course, global rule of law is still weak, but of course, I hope as an international lawyer that international law will keep progressing across a range of areas. And I've written on this topic and advocate for this, the progressive development of international law. And indeed, companies are, especially large multinational companies, are actors on the global scale. So some kind of enforcement authority, depending on what institution is engaged, is very feasible or very we can envision it for the future. but international law needs a lot of work to further develop, to build out from these, soft law norms that are not binding, to build up our institutions and to make sure they are fair, that they incarnate, best practices that facilitate, company activity in a just, in a fair way, ecologically sustainable, truly sustainable way. So there's a lot of work to do, but of course we need an international system that helps to regulate, properly all the various actors who are at play.
Thank you very much. So that gives us something practical to work on, and in your hands as well. I'm sure we have plenty of good things to hopefully look forward to in the future. So I'm afraid that's us at the end of our hour. It went very quickly. It was great to have so many questions, and I'm looking forward to watching this again and getting even more back from it. So much ground was covered this afternoon. Thank you so much to Maja Groff, Professor Joe Goldblatt, and Bonnie Evans-Hill. Thank you very much indeed.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.